Welcome to the Chronic Warriors podcast with Cassandra A. Campbell.
A platform to share,
Hear,
and cheer chronic illness warriors.
Just know that when you made your commitment to your partner, you took their whole selves.
To be able to have a bad day, to be able to say, do you know what, I can't cope no more.
I am a chronic warrior because every day I wake up and I'm so glad to still be here.
Hello, warriors. Today I'm talking with Des about his experience of living with a chronic illness and his work in the community. Welcome, Des. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to take part.
You're most welcome. So, can you start with telling us a bit about yourself, please?
My name is Des Quinn. I'm chair of Fibromyalgia Action UK, which is a charity that looks after improving awareness of fibromyalgia within the UK and supporting people that have the condition. It's a volunteer role, and in my other life, I run a small IT company as well as being a dad. So I often find that it's competing interests between the charity, my real life, or is it the other way around? But as chair of the charity, I'm responsible for the direction of the charity, making sure that our small team is going all in the correct way and trying to meet objectives like making sure Awareness Week has got something important happening in it, making sure that our day-to-day activities work well and that we continue to support people with a condition.
Okay, lovely. So we are going to come back to Fibromyalgia Action UK and talk a bit more about that. But I'd love it if you could just share with us about your condition and how it affects you, particularly as a man.
Well, when I was diagnosed, I think it's about maybe 18 years ago now, I was very much in a minority for being male with the condition, but also I was around about 33, 34. So I was very young relatively at that point. The picture's changed nowadays. More people are getting diagnosed that are both younger and male. We're seeing more diversity. But for me, I was very fortunate. My GP was quite helpful after being diagnosed or initially thought to have carpal tunnel because I worked in IT. It seemed to be the natural thing for the pains that I was having. When it developed a little bit further, he said, well, maybe it's this fibromyalgia, and gave us some information to go away with. And then the next day, I was heading down to my brother, Amersham, and it just so happened that his partner had fibromyalgia and was involved with the charity. So I got a crash course. I got to find out about the condition very quickly. I got my initial questions answered. My GP was friendly. He was helpful. He gave me away information, but my brother-in-law was very helpful in pointing me in the right direction, explaining any sort of gaps in knowledge. And to be honest, he was involved with the charity. So that's the reason why I get involved with the charity as well very quickly. But as a male, I didn't really, because of the entrance to the condition that I had, I didn't notice any real difficulties. Later on, I always noticed that there was more women with the condition than males. The sort of person I am, I didn't have any problems interacting within support groups or groups that had that sort of gender imbalance that we often see within support groups with fibromyalgia. I do know that other males, other people that have had longer diagnosis journeys than I have had a much more difficult time of it. It's something that we hear in the community quite a lot.
As you said, more women seem to have fibromyalgia than men. Do you think the engagement in groups, etc., is because of that? Or do you think it could be because men don't necessarily get involved in those kind of conversations?
Maybe is about as best as I can give you. I think it's quite a complicated question and answer. Certainly, we've had less people being diagnosed with fibromyalgia because it was only in 2010 that the diagnostic criteria changed slightly to make it more relevant that males would get diagnosed and younger people would get diagnosed, and the criteria has changed more since then. Awareness has improved, so more people are aware that this is a condition to be diagnosed with, and that includes doctors as well, because they were perhaps not wanting to diagnose males or young people. But you've also got the fact that males perhaps don't go to the doctor as much, although we don't know if that's actually as relevant as it's often spoken about. But then, is it a difficulty with males going to a support group? Don't know. What I do know is there's a number of people in online communities or people that I've spoken to that are male that feel as if there's not a place for them within a support group. There's plenty of males that do attend support groups and are fine, but there's a lot of males that certainly take part in male-only Facebook groups because they don't feel as if they can cut through in the conversation, or it's particularly relevant to themselves, or various reasons. They just feel as if they need someone else to talk to. So it's quite complicated.
Yeah, I can understand that. You mentioned about the diagnosis process changing. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more for me, please?
Yeah. So in 2010, or even going a little bit further, we've got the American College of Rheumatologists that have set the diagnostic criteria that the majority of the world has as a reference point. They may have variations, they may have their own criteria, but everything comes back to the ACR criteria. And first of all, in 1990, we used tender point tests where they would press areas of your body with a certain amount of pressure, a measured amount of pressure, and you would react in pain. Now, normal people would react in discomfort, but people with fibromyalgia would react with a severe pain response, if you like. It would be very noticeable. So these are areas in the body that are already sensitive. It's just in fibromyalgia, they are more sensitive. So they're not really specifically fibromyalgia points, if you like. And they were used as a classification tool within research to try and get a group of people that might be ready to take part in a study and they have fibromyalgia to this extent, etc. But it became the only tool that doctors had at that point that they could trust in order to diagnose people. So in 2010, after realizing that there was plenty of males, for example, that had maybe 10 out of 18 trigger points, or maybe had 9, but had all the other symptoms that came with fibromyalgia. So they didn't have fibromyalgia, but had it in every other respect, but just didn't make up that 11 points on the test.
Right.
So the criteria changed to be a little bit more all-encompassing of what fibromyalgia means, and the tender point test was depreciated. It's taken time within the UK for us to get up to speed with that. We're now on the 2016 criteria. The change there is previously if you had arthritis and fibromyalgia, then you couldn't have fibromyalgia because you had arthritis. So it couldn't exist on top of another condition. That's now changed as well. You could have both because there is distinctions between arthritis and fibromyalgia. And these criteria changes have meant that more people are aware of what the differences are. More people are able to get diagnosed because we have this granularity. Still not perfect, but it has meant that more males, more young people, when you've got fibromyalgia symptoms, it's no longer this stereotype of that only affects a 40-year-old woman or a 40-plus-year-old woman.
That's really interesting to me because when I, after 20 years, got a diagnosis, I was initially diagnosed with joint hypermobility syndrome and suspected fibromyalgia. And thinking about it now, that was around 2010.
Mm-hmm.
And they never actually confirmed fibromyalgia. They just said suspected because there wasn't a test that they could do it. So for a long time, I never took much notice of the fibromyalgia semi-diagnosis. I don't know if that's what you would call it. But I do remember, and it's not so much now, but those sort of the trigger points and the pressing and being in excruciating pain and all the other symptoms that go with it, which I seem to have a lot more in my 20s and 30s than I do now. But it helps me to have an understanding because I wasn't officially diagnosed with that. And it was only about maybe 3 years ago that an osteopath actually confirmed for me, yeah, that's definitely fibromyalgia symptoms as well as hypermobility, EDS. So yeah, that's really, really interesting for me. And, you know, you say in 2010, that was the time when they sort of suspected it, but they never took it any further.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things there. First of all, EDS, hypermobility, there's an overlap with fibromyalgia. There's a lot of people within our community that perhaps as a young person are diagnosed as hypermobile. Nothing much is taken about it because perhaps it's not created any real symptoms at that point. But yeah, that's potentially a risk factor for you then getting fibromyalgia in later life.
Yeah, they do say that fibromyalgia is an associated condition of EDS. So it all makes sense. But there is a crossover, as you said, so sometimes I do find it hard to differentiate between the two.
And I think that's the same with a lot of different conditions as well. When you have more than one, it is hard to pin down. Some people know that this is fibromyalgia pain. Some people can't tell the difference. But another point you were talking about is they didn't seem as if they were confident to maybe diagnose fibromyalgia. And unfortunately, that's a situation that we have a lot of the time. We want to be confident in the doctors. We want them to tell us the answer, the solution. But they're working within this scale as well of, it could be, it probably is We know more now, but yeah, so I'll say it might be fibromyalgia. And yeah, that doesn't fill the patient with a lot of confidence. So that's why diagnostic criteria is further research to try and pin that down so that we know how it works. If you tell the patient that that's where it is, and then you've got a path, the patient's going to walk away with a better frame of mind as well, and not spend the next 5 years trying to check every other condition that might apply when this is the best fit.
Yeah. So what would you say that people think a typical person with fibromyalgia looks like?
It's a very complicated question, and people will normally, certainly online, they'll describe fibromyalgia through the prism of their own condition. And that means that you have this picture that's totally depending on how your symptoms affect you, what you're able to do and not able to do. Yet fibromyalgia, you have younger people, males. There's a whole different picture of diversity in symptoms and in the makeup of who has fibromyalgia. Even it used to be people thinking, well, it's something related to sun, etc., vitamin D. They don't have fibromyalgia in countries where it's sunny. Yet, of course, we have similar numbers in Australia, Nigeria, or wherever else there is the sun. So the picture of what is fibromyalgia is quite diverse. It can be someone that's got a low level of pain that has massive cognitive issues or moderate cognitive issues. It's really been troubled by the fact that we describe pain as chronic pain, because people take that as an amount of severity of pain, as opposed to it's pain that lasts for more than 3 months.
Yes.
So persistent pain, I think, would probably do the community a lot better in describing fibromyalgia. Yeah,
and there are so many descriptive words that people use, in a lot of the groups that I go into. And sometimes I'm like, what on earth does that mean? I'm still trying to catch up on what all the different descriptions are about things and the different abbreviations and all the rest of it. But what I have found is that a lot of the groups can be quite negative.
Mm-hmm.
And can also isolate people in some ways, even though it might not be intentional. I know for myself, it took a long time for me to accept that I had a disability, because I found, whether it be the EDS or the fibromyalgia, my symptoms might not be as bad as some people, or I wasn't in a wheelchair. So I'm not disabled, because that's kind of the image that I had growing up, that to be disabled, you had to either have lost a limb or be born without a limb or be in a wheelchair or something like that. And it took me having counselling to actually acknowledge and accept, or actually, Cassandra, there are things that you can't do because of your conditions. So the inability to do certain things in everyday life means that you have a disability.
Yeah, totally agree. We even look at the logos for what is a disabled person, albeit that we're getting some versatility in how they're displayed nowadays, but it was obviously the person that was in a wheelchair, so visually disabled, whereas we have many invisible chronic illnesses and many invisibly disabled people. I don't think of myself as disabled. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I don't think of myself as disabled in terms of the benefits situation. I know I would never be able to qualify there. And we do have disability applying in different areas, whether it's in employment, whether it's to achieve benefits, or whether it's perhaps within a healthcare setting. But what does disability mean? It basically means that you're not able to do something that you really should be able to do at your particular age and physical ability.
Yeah.
And within our community, and you were mentioning about symptoms, the phrase I use is symptom bingo. And it is a pejorative word. I don't like this aspect that we have of, let's say, 15 years ago, we had maybe a symptom list online that had 50 symptoms in it. Over time, it's went to 100 symptoms, it's went to 150. I think it's currently, you're seeing things going about that have 250 plus symptoms. And why is that a bad thing? It's really good to describe fibromyalgia, to be aware of what it is. Well, it's not very helpful if you've got 5 or 10 different ways to describe pain, or you've got contradictory phrases within it. Yeah, you could be feeling the cold, but feeling the warm, feeling too hot, or you had polar opposites that don't make sense. It'll delegitimizes it. They can be useful in a sense, but it delegitimizes it, particularly to invalidate people that don't have those symptoms. As a male, there are plenty in these lists that describe gynecological symptoms, vulvodynia, and various other things that are only applicable to females. Now, they may be correct and might apply to the community for women. But if you're a male looking at that symptom list, then I must not have fibromyalgia because I don't have that symptom, and all of those symptoms. You're ruling people out of the condition, which is, I would actually say, dangerous. Certainly, it's not helpful. people are then not going to be able to get the support that they require. So we do have diagnostic criteria, and we do have comorbid conditions that go along with fibromyalgia. And if your symptom is part of your comorbid condition, like EDS in your situation, then that's not a symptom of fibromyalgia.
No.
Or certainly it needs to be put in that context that it's clear. And if you have a conversation with a doctor and you say, well, I've got 220 out of these 250 symptoms, it probably took you a long time to actually explain that to the doctor in the first place.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to help you in that doctor's appointment, though. And it might actually lessen the doctor's view of you, although I think they're professional enough to deal with it. But it's not a good direction of travel.
Yeah, I totally agree. And having a charity like Fibromyalgia Action UK to be able to explain that and to differentiate and to be more specific on the symptoms, I think is really, really important, because people, I know, is content to just run away with all of these symptoms and all of these conditions, and and it's just an endless list and almost like a badge of honor.
A competition.
Yes.
That's part of the pejorative symptom bingo type phrase, to be honest, because it's not all the time, and it's not normally used in that way, I think, most of the time. But there certainly are occasions where people will, I don't know if it's one-upmanship, but I'm worse than you. And it doesn't matter if people are finding support in that way of dealing with it, but it does matter on the other side of things when you have people that are earlier in the journey, getting used to what fibromyalgia is, not to have their hope eroded, but to actually get proper support, irrespective of whether you like the information that's been presented to you or not. You need to have the right information. That information needs to be correct. You don't have to like it, but it needs to be correct.
Most definitely. Could you tell us just a little bit more about what you guys do over there at the charity?
Well, I mean, the very first thing that we do is try and raise awareness of this condition. So just as we were talking about over time, the diagnostic criteria has changed. Over time, I've been involved almost for about 2 decades now. I've seen the difference in awareness. You've got more people that are aware of what the condition is. And that's the core principle of the charity. Everybody will be asking, like, can we get biological research? But if people don't know what the condition is, we're in a situation, we don't ask what's cancer. We know what cancer is because it's everybody's experience that's been touched by it. The amount of people that have been touched by fibromyalgia, it's significant. There's too many to count, but we need to be in a position where the awareness level is sufficient so that patients are confident that they know they've got an information path to find out about what's going on with themselves and where they can go next. Doctors are aware of what they have to do. That criteria is in front of them. The NHS website is a little bit behind sometimes in other respects, so that has to be up to date. That's one of the things that we'll point out when they haven't quite updated to the 2016 criteria to take off the fact that it's available as a diagnosis in its own. Any content that's out there on any website that we think is a primary reference source that we see that it needs corrected, we'll be doing that. But again, that's awareness. That's getting the right information out to the right people. And we'll talk to anybody about it. The other thing that we'll do, again, it comes off the back of awareness, is we'll talk to employers. So we were recently talking to the civil service with members of Downing Street to do a presentation to their civil service department, the business department, and talking about fibromyalgia to help people with the condition know where to get support, know about their colleagues that have got the condition, and also about systems that are in place to help them get something called a disability passport as a mechanism so that they can move between jobs and have reasonable adjustments and have it recorded so they don't have to explain their life story every time they change manager. Royal Bank of Scotland, Office of National Statistics, anybody that's out there, we've got Barclays and we've got a Network Rail coming up quite shortly, and there's a couple others as well. So it's all about awareness and just so that people understand this is what fibromyalgia is, this is what you can do. Small changes can make a big difference. As well as that, it's the person that gets newly diagnosed, sending out an information booklet to them. That's one of the most important things that we'll ever do, because as you're diagnosed, you've no idea what it is. Getting good quality information that tells you it's the start of a journey. You're not alone. It's not all in your head. You can go and talk to a support group. You can talk to ourselves. You can find out a little bit more. So it's always the most important thing that we do.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing really brilliant work in the community. I mean, I've seen your social media post, which is one of the reasons I was hoping to get you on the show, because I can see that you're doing great work out there. And I think it's fantastic. And what you were talking about in regards to organisations, agencies, the government, etc., is so important. for myself, having to explain what's wrong, what this symptom is, how it affects me, and, you know, having to do those things. Definitely in the past, when I was an employee, it was really difficult. And at those times, we never had things like the Disability Act in the workplace. It just didn't exist, basically. So you could be quite easily discriminated against. I was discriminated against in the workplace. And that was part of the reason why I decided I wanted to be self-employed. So I didn't have so much of that pressure. And again, that whole thing of, you know, going for interviews or moving to different departments and having to keep explaining things, it's a lot. So getting that ingrained within organisations and agencies, I think is really important, and that's brilliant work that you're doing there.
Well, see, I mean, it's twofold. One, you're helping potential employees within their existing workplace. But every person that you're talking to is a new person that might need to know more about fibromyalgia. They're a member of the public as well, so it's general awareness into the bargain.
Yeah.
I mean, the Equality Act has fibromyalgia mentioned in the guidance notes, which is great, but if the line manager doesn't know what the Equality Act is and doesn't know what their responsibilities are, that employee is still going to suffer. Because often it's not the organisation that's the big bad problem, it's the line manager that's ignorant and has got too much on their plate, which is why one of our recent editions of our employees and employers booklet is so important, because it references the Equality Act, it references reasonable adjustments, it gives some good suggestions, it provides other areas of support and further information. Without a resource that addresses a need, then there's ignorance, and that just means that people suffer. So that's, again, what we're all about.
Okay, wonderful. So what would you say are the biggest challenges that a charity faces? I know with most charities, it's usually funding. Is that the same for you guys?
At the moment, no, we're actually all right. We don't get any direct funding from anyone. We get it through individual giving, from just giving pages that people create, shaving their head or jumping out of a plane. I don't think we've had somebody do both at the one time, but it wouldn't surprise me. Through COVID, we've had a drop in fundraising income, but we were building up reserves because we were moving into a new office and we were looking to develop the charity, but we're still a small team. We've got 3 full-time equivalents that allow us to do the work that we do, keep it consistent, but we want to do more. I mean, the opportunities that we've got in front of us right now, I could do with double that size of team, to be honest. But it's all about trying to work with what you have. So often in charities or anywhere else, it's, do you have enough money? Yes. I mean, I'm sure there's a project that'll come along that what we've got at the moment isn't enough. If we wanted to do biomedical research, yeah, we've got nowhere near anything to be able to do that. So funding, yes. Do we have the right skills? And that's perhaps a weak point for some of the opportunities that we've got. And do we have enough time with the people we've got? Because it's all right if you've got a lawyer that's got an hour a week, but you actually need 10 hours a week, for example. You've just not got enough time. So it's one of those 3 things. It's always the weakness when you're doing a project or trying to move things forward. Certainly the challenge that we've got at this moment in time is coming back off of COVID and managing this really strange situation of people working in different ways and mechanisms, etc., getting a handle on that, bringing the office back to its normal sort of balance. It's the opportunities we've got in front of them. Do we have enough people to actually achieve them? Because there is some exciting things that are going to happen in the next few months, for example, if we can manage to do them.
Okay. So do you think there's enough support out there for men and for people in general, for men and children, women?
There's a lot of diverse support out there, but I think if you ask people within the community, I think the answer would be no. It's not the right support at the right time. There's community support, but sometimes there's a need for skilled support in particular areas, whether that's benefit support. We do provide some of that for people with fibromyalgia, filling in PIP claims, etc. But there's always a need for more. We've got information gaps, the likes of, again, speaking about males. When you're talking about even fibromyalgia generally and sexual health, there's like an absence of information around about that, and particularly it'd be relevant for males. There's information around about males generally and how they deal with fibromyalgia. There's a gap there that could be filled in. There's so much more work to be done. We're never idle, to be honest. There's always something else to do. We are going to be creating recently created a new Facebook group that's just a general group that's growing quite well. But what we will be doing is creating a young person's group and a group for males for the very same reasons. There's a need for that support for that particular group of people that perhaps needs an area where people can share without getting involved in the other conversations, rightly or wrongly, whether they're relevant to them or not. There's some specific things that are only relevant to that particular group.
What would you say is an achievement by the charity that you're most proud of?
We get feedback all the time from people that say that the employment booklet, for example, it's the newest booklet we've created, allowed them to continue working when they felt that they were going to have to give up. We had someone that the manager actually worked in the same office that we work. The person was working remotely. They saw a review copy of the booklet. They were involved to get a comment because they had a particular situation. Now, I got the feedback that prior to COVID, the person had maybe been off, I think it was 6 or 7 times in the previous 3 or 6 months. So a good illness rate, if you like, a good number of times off, yet throughout all of COVID, with the suggestions taken on board, simple things like a cushion, a chair, flexible working, a couple of adjustments here or there. They didn't have a day off at all for COVID, apart from one day for, I think, a hospital appointment, not to do with fibromyalgia. Feedback from the manager about how the changes had made that impact, and the feedback that we get like that from people that feel alone, that's always the best achievement that we can have. Getting your website, and it is a few years ago now, mentioned in Parliament for the information it provides, getting to appear on BBC News and talk about it and get the bump that comes from it in resource packs and people talking about the condition, yeah, they're great. But you can't really beat just the fact that the people that get helped coming back to say thank you.
Yeah, that is a wonderful feeling, isn't it? Just to know you've helped somebody and had
For
that.
someone with fibromyalgia myself and doing this as a volunteer, yeah, that's the reward that's worthwhile.
Lovely. So, as a man, do you have any advice for other men with fibromyalgia or similar conditions?
Well, as I said before, sometimes some people don't feel comfortable in a sort of mixed gender or feel isolated. I think you need to be confident that people will be able to give advice and you take from it what you can. The advice that we give generally as a charity applies across the board 99% of the time. And what the support you'll get from a support group, everyone I've attended has been friendly, it's been helpful, and there'll be something to take away from it. So a little bit get out of your own head and just ask people for help and take part. But what I would also say is keep up activity levels, try and keep yourself active, make sure at the end of each day, and this applies to anybody, make sure at the end of each day that there's something you've done that you feel as if you've accomplished something. There's a positive aspect to it. Now that could be taking the dog for a walk, that could be doing half a mile walk just to get more activity. Just make sure there's things that you can look back at and say, I managed to do something yesterday, no matter how big or how small.
Yeah, that's something that I really believe in, is about acknowledging the small wins. And for some people, that could just be getting out of bed today.
Very much so, yes.
It doesn't have to be massive. It doesn't have to be what people see as big. It could just be something that's maybe normal or usual for other people, but for somebody with a chronic illness, it could be a massive deal. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge and recognize, especially on those days when we don't feel up to it, when we actually do achieve even the smallest thing. I think it's important for us to really acknowledge that for ourselves.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it's very easy for us to be sitting here and thinking, I can't pay my mortgage because I'm off ill, or I'm not going to be able to go to that wedding, or I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not going to be able. No, think about what's in front of you. What can you do now? What are you able to achieve? You can't solve the problem that's 3 weeks down the road. There's no point worrying about that. It's what's happening now. What can I do as a small step to make sure that I'm going in the right direction? Focus on what affects you and what you can control. The rest isn't as important, and then measure when you actually accomplish things and acknowledge it.
I think that is brilliant advice, Des. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Okay, so the last thing I'm going to ask you is to complete this sentence for me. I am a chronic warrior because
I have no option would be my, I suppose, initial answer. There's not a really good alternative. Probably not as pithy or as helpful, but I'd rather be doing something positive and moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you with me today, Des. And I know that our listeners are going to get a lot out of what you've had to share today, because I definitely have.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care of yourself and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Chronic Warriors podcast. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share this podcast.